This next episode, number 4, the one that you're talking about, is called the Man Who Cried Himself to Sleep.
It's the episode where I recount how I was disclosed to when I was 18 by a member of the Reagan administration. Obviously, at 18, you're never expecting to get a bomb dropped on you like that. Yeah. The government has had a relationship, what we call an unholy alliance, with Hollywood going back to the 50s. In my mind, unequivocally. But are they doing what was presented to us, which was the heroic thing? You're going to be part of a slow drip disclosure program. The other side of it is it's a psyop and it's all disinformation.
Hi everyone, and welcome back to That UFO podcast. As always, my name is Andy, and joining me on today's show, I have 2 guests, the first of which returning to the show. He is a writer, producer, co-creator of Dark Skies, co-author of AD After Disclosure, and co-host of the wonderful Need to Know podcast with Richard Dolan. Welcome back, Bryce Zabel.
Great to be here. Thank you. And I want to introduce you and let you introduce my good friend, Brent Friedman.
Absolutely, and it's Brent's first appearance on the podcast. He himself, an award-winning writer and producer whose credits include Dark Skies, The Twilight Zone, Star Trek Enterprise, among many other acclamations in his career. Someone with a long-running personal interest in the UFO mystery. Welcome for the first time, Brent Friedman. Brent, you okay?
I'm doing great. Thrilled to be here.
Great to have you both on. Now, listen, first off, huge congratulations on Sound Light Frequency. Massive launch. We're now 3 episodes in. I believe as we record this, it's Wednesday, the 11th of March. The next episode should be dropping tomorrow, at least UK time, if I've got my times right. So huge well done. How have those first few weeks been for you?
Well, listen, I just want to say, because Brent will probably be he's such a shy retiring type and all that. No, but this next episode, number 4, the one that you're talking about, is called the Man Who Cried Himself to Sleep. And Brent, you ought to at least tease that one up, because I think this is the episode that when we submitted our first run to iHeart, they loved all of them, and then they got to number 4 and went, holy, their minds exploded. So, Brent, take it away.
So Bryce and I have joked that episode 4 is kind of the origin story of Sound, Light, and Frequency. And it's the episode where I recount how I was disclosed to when I was 18 by a member of the Reagan administration. And, it was a formative event in my life. Obviously, at 18, you're never expecting to get a bomb dropped on you like that. But additionally, for the creation of Dark Skies, it was what brought Bryce and I together, essentially, because, my wife was working for Bryce, who was producing a show at the time, and she realized he was into UFOs and said, oh, my husband's got a very interesting UFO story. And next thing I knew, I was in a restaurant talking to Bryce, telling him my story. And that became kind of the rallying point to say we should do something with this, and ultimately it became Dark Skies, which then set in motion JC and everything else. So again, this meeting that I had when I was 18 really started everything off.
And Andy, I just wanted to add that you said, how's it going? So it's going pretty great, because thank you for the nice words you said about Need to Know, but Need to Know is a UFO podcast, straight up. And what Brent and I got excited about, and what we think got iHeart excited to have us we're producing 36 of these things. So I think what got everybody excited is that it's unique. It is a blend of Hollywood and UFOs, and sometimes the government. And of course, this whole secrecy issue and how it's maintained. So we're having a good time, because the truth is, and this as a person who does this yourself, every episode is a learning experience. In terms of preparing for anything, you just have to learn a lot to be ready to show up and have game when it's time to be on the air. And with these 36, we're on a steep learning curve. We thought we knew a lot. We're finding out there's a lot more to know.
I don't want to blow smoke up your asses, to borrow an American phrase, but you come across both very natural, and it is a very different tone to Need to Know, whether that was with Ross or now with Richard, it sounds like a completely different entity. It's not just Bryce on another UFO podcast.
Right.
It sounds like the both of you have sat down, and I mean, no disrespect, I'm sure it's very well planned out, but you've literally sat at a table over a couple of beers and just spoke and then picked the highlights of your conversations, and it's structured, and you know, there's a President's Club episode, I've listened to the Spielberg episode, there's that introductory episode, like you say a lot, you're going to expand on as it goes on, but it does sound like two mates sitting down, hitting record, and saying, let's see what happens. Is that fair? Do you feel that way when you record?
Brent, I'll let you go with that.
Well, thank you for that. That was our goal, that people would listen to it and think it was just two guys kind of shooting the shit, as it were. But as Bryce said, it takes a lot of work to prep for these episodes, partly because we've couched everything as we're doing an active investigation. Right. And so we think of each kind of movie and TV show that we're bringing to an episode as witnesses that we're going to stand up and interrogate. And sometimes witnesses, you know, have a smoking gun and reveal incredible things that start to help your case. Other times the witness goes off in a direction you weren't anticipating, and you say, okay, well, next witness. So
Right.
we have a lot of rocks that we're going to turn over, because if you think about going back to, you know, the 50s, when you had the first flying saucer movie, all the way up until, let's go into June, when Spielberg's going to be launching, you know, Day of Disclosure Day. Every movie and TV series in between then is fair game for us. We can go in and take a look at them. And our attitude is, you know, it's all about pattern recognition, because any one movie isn't going to tell the whole story. We're looking for, you know, the big picture, right? Kind of the Google Earth view of, what does all this mean? Has anything been going on, or is it all just random? And so in order to pull that off, we have to go in and really not just watch the movies and the TV shows again. Many of them we've seen, most of them we've seen at least once, but go in and really look behind the scenes, look into the content, and look at the cultural time frame that they took place in, and start to do what you said, which is structure an episode so that there's some sort of coherence to it, because it could go just all over the place, and we want it to feel like we're kind of going all over the place, but yet still kind of come back to things where we start to connect dots. And so anyway, long way of saying, we put a lot of effort into sounding like we've put no effort into it.
Hey, that's so true, by the way. Andy, just to riff off what your question was too, it's very personal doing anything with anybody. I mean, anytime you're interviewing somebody, that's personal. But when you actually have a co-host, right? Well, Ross Coulthard and I, who started Need to Know, basically had never even met when we started the podcast. Right. We literally had formed a friendship over Zoom. Right. And then we didn't know each other. And that was like 3.5 years ago or whatever. Richard Dolan, who is currently the co-host of Need to Know, he and I go back to, as you pointed out, writing AD After Disclosure. But that was a professional thing. We came together to write a book. We wrote the book, and we sort of went our separate ways, and now we've rejoined. But Brent and I, it's a different thing. We met decades ago. We've stayed in touch. We've done other projects. We're good friends. Our families know each other. So part of it is preparation, and part of it, I think, is just coming to the thing and saying, look, Brent's got my back. I got his back. We're probably going to be okay. We're probably going to get out of this thing alive. And that, I think, probably accounts for a little bit of tone. It is nice to know that you just know the other person you're on. So it doesn't feel so much like you're doing a podcast. It's sort of like a work meeting, you know? And by the way, that is not a bad theory. I remember how Need to Know even started. It was Coulthard and I were talking on a Zoom, and it felt like a work meeting. And one of us said, what if we recorded this? What if we actually made a podcast out of this? The other guy said, I don't know what a podcast involves. Right. So we learned as we went. So Brent and I each bring, well, and then the other thing is Brent and I are each bringing pretty different sets of experiences to this. And instead of that being a problem, it's a solution. It gives us more to talk about. And even if I go off on a riff about one thing or another, he's able to pull it back into a different place, right? If it needs to be, and vice versa. So here's what I would say. I enjoy doing all this stuff. I guess maybe I'm a ham. I don't know. I was on air in TV news for a number of years, so I enjoyed the performance aspect of it, but I also enjoy the friendship aspect of it. Because, for example, just last night, Brent and I were on the phone talking over what the next episodes are going to be, right? Well, that's just fun. I mean, it's work, but it's fun, and that's the thing you look for in a good performance. You want your work to look like it's not so onerous.
Well, and just to riff on what Bryce said, there's been so many times when we've been talking about what we're going to do in an episode, and we get into these really interesting conversations, and we both look at each other and go, oh, why weren't we recording?
Were we recording?
Like, this was all the good stuff.
Yeah.
And so yeah, it's just that the line kind of is very blurry between what is work and what is the show. And it is all fun. I will echo what Bryce said. It's great to have that sense of camaraderie with somebody where we're not competing, right, for attention or anything. This is our story, and we're just kind of having fun passing the baton back to each other and telling it. And as he said, we both have very different perspectives on the phenomenon at large, but we share so many experiences that we're talking about. And even within those, as we've already indicated, like with regards to what JC looked like, right? What he
better explain who JC is if you're.
I was going to say, yeah, just in case anyone's not heard that first episode and they've not had the scene set, yeah.
Yes, right. Well, actually, it'd be fun, Andy. I know this is your show, but you heard the first episode. Who do you think JC is, or what did JC mean to you?
I'm trying to not because I listened to the first episode on YouTube, which obviously has the videos kind of interspliced, and I tried to look away from it because I found myself kind of mesmerized. So I had this picture in my head of, like you guys said, this 30-year-old guy in a suit. It's a little bit Men in Blackish, turning up nondescript at a party, doesn't have the MJ12 badge of gave everyone to wear for a bit of identification, and gives you has this conversation, this offer, prompts he's watched the pilot of Dark Skies, which is what everyone's there to see, when he really shouldn't have had the capacity or a capability to watch this show. I think, Bryce, you basically try and trip the guy up. Well, what happens after this part with the crop circle? He then tells you exactly what's happened. Okay, absolutely. Fair enough. Yep, he's seen the episode. And it's that idea of someone coming into this Hollywood setting with directions to get these guys who have created this show to give you a hand in making the rest of the show, to point it in a direction that whatever government agency this guy's from want this to go in. So, yeah.
I just the former TV host in me had it beaten into me in broadcast school that you need to make sure you can't use acronyms, and you got to tell people what you're talking about. So for the record, Dark Skies was an NBC series that we created together and aired in 96 and 97. And what we're talking about right now is at the premiere party for the show, before it had aired, the night that it was airing for the first time, we had a party here in my backyard that I live in the same house I lived in then. And a guy came to our party that we didn't know, said he was from the Office of Naval Intelligence and wanted to give us help on our series, right? And he had seen it, as you pointed out, Andy. So, yeah, so that's what happened. And that's what that first episode, I'm not too worried about spoilers, but I would say to anybody, that's a good ride, because it's kind of the basis of understanding why we kind of got radicalized on this issue in the first place. It might have been one thing if we were simply, interested in a good alien movie and making one ourselves. But when we got approached by this person, it didn't stop there, nor did it start there, by the way. And we realized something's going on. I mean, something is going on where people who at least say they represent the government have reached out to us to try to have an impact on our content. So that's what episode 1 is about. It's also the launch for the entire series. It's not like we're only going to be talking in this series, by the way, Andy, about our own experiences. We're looking for other people's experiences. We're looking for the historical record on certain films and TV series that have been out there. And there's so much to know. There's a lot of people that have kind of looked into this over the years. And it's no surprise to anybody. The U.S. military has certainly cooperated with a lot of films and TV to help them get get some of that hardware on screen. But also the CIA has been involved with Hollywood over the years in ways that we don't even quite understand completely, because first, it's secret, and second of all, the CIA is very good. They don't put things in records. They don't write it down so you can go get a Freedom of Information Act about it. In fact, the thing about the CIA has always been, what's the quote? The quote is, "Nothing in writing." Right? If you've got a secret, don't put it in writing. So, yeah, that's kind of how we look at this thing. It was the moment that charged us up on this topic. And you might say, well, why in the world would you wait 30 years to talk about it? Well, we've sort of talked about it a little bit over time, but we were busy with other careers and so forth. And there are other reasons. But at a certain point in your life or your career, you go, hey, if I'm going to tell this story, I better do it now. I'm not the young guy I used to be. So I'm like, hey, if we're going to talk about this, Brent, let's not wait another year or two. Let's just get this thing over with. So season 1 of Sound, Light, and Frequency is all about that. And by the way, I just point this out. If you're saying, well, how do I even watch this thing? It's pretty simple. Go wherever you listen to podcasts, type in Sound, Light, Frequency. Pretty much you'll find the show. And we have a website, soundlightfrequency.com. Although the show itself is called, just for the record, Sound, Light, and Frequency. And if you want to know why the show is called that falls into spoiler territory. You got to watch episode 1 to find out why we would ever name a podcast Sound, Light, and Frequency.
I won't spoil that then either. But do you know what I have liked is the little jumps of extra information, even like discussing things like Project Serpo, where one of you bring it up and it's like talking about Close Encounters, second episode, talking about Close Encounters, Steven Spielberg, which you have to talk about, and we're going to get to speaking about a new Spielberg movie in a little while. I think we have to. And talking about the ending of it and the idea of a transfer of, scientists, and it's very Project Serpo-y, the idea that 1965, you've got the US government gave 12 personnel to receive 12 non-human personnel, shall we say, and this is lore, UFO lore. Is it all disinformation? Is it all misinformation? Is it just nonsense, or is there something to it? And it was just nice to hear little bits like that entertained, not spoken about as if this is fact, not ridiculed, not a hoax, but just putting it out there to say, and I think your reference is at the chicken and the egg. What came first? Did Spielberg take that ending from those documents or someone he spoke to? Or was that ending put in there because, chicken or egg, as you put it, I think was the better way. So, Brent, I'll come to you on that. What are your thoughts on these little side quests? And are we going to see a lot of these coming up through the podcast, dipping into all these different kind of sidebars in UFO lore?
Yeah, absolutely. The case you point out is a really good one because, like you said, it's hard to know. Well, we can't know what Spielberg was aware of or was like, unless he comes on our show and decides to disclose. It's all speculation. And even with something like Project Serpo, like you said, it's lore, right? There's no hard evidence, but a lot of the area that we're living in is it a coincidence, right? And that's a very subjective, question that everyone has to ask. And I think our attitude is we're not necessarily, we're trying to lay out a case, right? But the audience is the jury, right? And each one of them will decide, well, at what point is there such a preponderance of evidence, even if it's circumstantial, that it goes beyond coincidence, and you start to see, no, there's clearly something going on here. There was some level of intervention manipulation. To what degree? It's open to interpretation. And so, yes, we're going to be seeing a lot more of those. One of the things that we talked about from the very beginning of the show when we were trying to figure out what is the format, what's our approach, is, there was a show, I believe it was on PBS, called Connections, where they would look at historical things and they would say, the Archduke of Belgium, had this uprising in 1642. And then look how that led to the creation of the rubber band. And you're like, wait, what? But then you make all these connections and suddenly you start to see how everything is entangled and everything's interconnected. And so we thought that's a really interesting approach for ufology, right? Which, by the way, somebody correct me right now, because apparently I'm saying that word wrong.
I say ufology.
Ufology. Okay. because people keep pointing out you're doing it all wrong. Okay.
I've heard both, but I would say ufology. I think
Okay.
it rolls off the tongue easier, but ufology I've heard as well.
All right. Well, you know what? It's 2 votes to 1 here. So I'm going to go with ufology. But the idea is that within ufology, there is so much kind of nebulous kind of evidence. And so we're just trying to bring things a little bit more into focus, because my personal belief is that the truth is all subjective, right? We're looking for the absolute, like, nuts and bolts, 100% this is certain, and short of an Independence Day situation where aliens come down and blow up the White House and everyone sees it. We're into a world where everyone has to make their own decision based on what they've heard, what they've seen, but most importantly, what they've experienced. And so I think one of the things that's been interesting for me is I've had friends and colleagues who've gone and, listened to the first 3 episodes and went back and watched Close Encounters with the new lens, with a new kind of idea. And they were like, wow, I noticed so many things that I had never seen before. But to me, that's a metaphor for, ufology, but also life, right? When you start to become aware of things, you start to notice different connections. And I think that's what, going back to something Bryce said, is I think that's our unique, secret sauce, if you will, is like, we're trying to provide a very specific point of view on ufology that most people haven't done. And because we are Hollywood insiders, we're bringing a certain level of insight into the behind the scenes and the process and how it all works. And hopefully that provides a new way of looking at this, because I think we need to look at the phenomenon from many different points of view to have a full understanding of what might be going on.
Andy, and just to echo and expand that, it is true that if somebody watches one of these episodes, they may go, wow, I never knew that film existed, or I haven't seen that film for a long time. Let me look at it. And then they see it through this different lens that Brent was talking about. But I want to tell you, it happens to us.
Yeah.
I mean, yes, I have seen Close Encounters, for example, just used it as an example. I saw it when it first came out. I saw that was in 1977. I saw the 1980 director's cut. Or not the director's cut, the special edition. Then in 1997, I think I saw the director's cut, and I've seen it a couple of times since then. And so I sat down to watch it again for our podcast preparation, and I saw it completely differently. I saw things that I had missed in all those previous times or forgotten that I knew. And what I think is making it fascinating is that if you're on Need to Know with somebody who's got game like Coulthard and Dolan, you gotta bring game on what is, what's in the news right now. But what we're trying to do is unearth a kind of a different thing, right? The game for us is to say, well, if you take a look, say if a show like one of our upcoming shows is about unidentified submerged objects, right? So there's one way to look at that. That would be go straight to Richard Dolan, because he wrote a book about it, right?
Yep.
And he knows a lot about it. But for us, we don't go to the book for the episode. We go to The Abyss. We go to
great movie.
Other places where people have referenced this in a film and a television way, and we watch those things and ask ourselves, what are they saying here? You know, what exactly is being floated as the main ideas of this film? And then, because we know something about the UFO history, ask, well, okay, was this the first time anyone said this out loud in this film? And then has it found its way into ufology? Or was it in ufology and the person who wrote it, the film, knew that stuff and incorporated it into the film? So that's kind of where you're going with the chicken and egg thing too, because it's not always the same answer. Sometimes it's out in ufology, and let's face it, there's 12,000 plus members of the Writers Guild of the United States, let alone around the world. And these people are all looking for great ideas, and they may know something about UFOs now because it's in the news, and they may write something about it. And that's certainly happened over the years. But then the larger question for us is, yeah, that's all true, and we're going to look into those things. But for us, in addition to starting Dark Skies that way, where we both knew a lot and we did some investigation, we had a lot of conversations, the truth of the matter is it really lit our brains on fire to have this guy come to our party and say, I want to talk to you guys about your pilot episode, which no one is supposed to have seen, but we've seen it and we have notes. I mean, think about that.
Now, obviously, I can't say much more because I've not heard the rest of the series. That's still to come, and we'll leave that for the territory it's going to go into. But skipping forward to now, and that Hollywood influence, you mentioned Spielberg as being maybe the guy in Hollywood that was he briefed, and to what level was he briefed? Is he still briefed? And we're going to get to Disclosure Day. Genuinely, though, we'll come to Brent first. What do you believe is the level of influence Hollywood has on the UFO topic? And do you feel it's a deliberate influence still to this day to feed the public information?
Yeah, it's a great question. I'll say that when we started down this path, I was thinking, well, it has to be like they tried to influence us, and the question that Bryce and I used to ask ourselves was, we couldn't have been the only ones, right? Like all of the people, over the decades that ever made something UFO or alien related, they only came to us, right? It just didn't make any sense. And then, if you listen to the Spielberg episode, you realize that there seemed to be, at least circumstantial evidence that Spielberg might have been approached just like we were at some point in his career. So then you start to go, okay, well, we know it happened to us. It might have happened to Steven Spielberg. Who else? Right. But we didn't have any evidence at that point. And I think now when you're asking me today, we've done a lot of research. We've already recorded a number of episodes. And the more we start to see the patterns, the more evidence that presents itself, I will say absolutely, unequivocally, the government, right? And just that's a big word, but just the government has had a relationship, what we call an unholy alliance, with Hollywood going back to the 50s. In my mind, unequivocally. Now, I think the bigger question, right, and this is something that we try to grapple with, is why? Well, there's the obvious, which is, media, as we know, is like such a huge influence on the public's, the public's thought process, right? And to shape the narrative around how people feel about UFOs and aliens would be super important, especially if they're sitting on a secret, right?
Yeah.
So that's number one. But are they doing what was presented to us, which was the heroic thing? You're going to be part of a slow drip disclosure program so that you can get the truth out to the public, right? That's very heroic. I'm going to be, I'm a crusader. The other side of it is it's a psyop and it's all disinformation. That's the question that for me, I'm grappling with. I'm absolutely certain they were involved and had their hands in many things, but to Bryce's point, maybe not everything, but enough things, right? To be in control of that narrative. But to what end? To what end? That's the thing that's what I'm so excited about, is like, is it going to be possible to get that answer in the course of our 36 episodes? I hope so.
Bryce, do you want to come in on that same question?
Well, well, you ask a appropriate question, because just last week, the Hollywood Reporter did a feature article, and they're the trades here in Hollywood. There's Hollywood Reporter, Daily Variety kind of thing. And their article is called "Hollywood is Suddenly Taking UFOs Seriously." Right. And I was lucky enough to be quoted in it, talking about things, but it's talking about Spielberg's movie and other things.
Mm.
And I think what their point of view in this thing, because they are fairly mainstream, is okay, because it's in the news, Hollywood's waking up and looking into it. So we're kind of looking at it from that other point of view as well, though. We're saying, well, how did it get in the news? What has the new? In other words, there's more than just what made movies about flying saucers important in the 50s. There's also all the stuff going on behind the scenes when this was laying out. And your listeners and your audience probably are well versed on some of that. For example, in 1953, the CIA convened a panel called the Robertson panel. And one of the things they came to a conclusion about was, hey, you know what? It would be really good if we could recruit Walt Disney and his company to help us, keep a lid on this and not make people think so much about the UFO topic. Kind of interesting stuff. And there it is. It's a real document, and it really happened. So the question is, if that happened in 1953, as we ask in one of our episodes, how is it that in 2026, the Disney company is the number one purveyor of alien-themed programming in the entire world?
Mm.
I mean, what do they have? They have Marvel now. They have Star Wars. They have the Avatar library. Disney has more aliens. I mean, there's other places that do alien stuff, but is it a coincidence, as Brent said, that Disney is the number one purveyor of it? Who knows? We're looking into it.
Let's look at Disclosure Day, which is due for release on the 12th of June. Who knows if anyone's listening from the folks who work there, if they're looking for a UK premiere, need a UFO podcaster to be down there, I'm more than happy to travel on my own dime. And that includes the States as well, but it looks big. I'm a big movie guy, as you both are, obviously. I'm excited about the trailer. I think it looks like it's taking the UFO conversation, maybe with some of the tropes that we know well and people listening or watching this know well, and bringing them to a bigger mainstream audience. It's not giving too much away. I think we're still waiting on what, again, I'm preaching to the choir here, a 2.5 minute, 3 minute long trailer that maybe fleshes out a little bit of story. I would expect to get any time in the next 4 to 6 weeks, a few months before it drops. Normally you get that kind of big main trailer. But what are your guys' thoughts? Brent, I'll come to you first on that movie, and again, Spielberg being at the helm of a big blockbuster alien film.
Well, I think there's a number of layers to this. There's first and foremost the movie itself. What is the story? We've gotten little glimpses of it in the trailers. Bryce and I even did a whole kind of analysis of it for Need to Know. And it's fascinating because, like you said, it's hitting on certain tropes, right? But it also feels like it's introducing some new ideas as well. So it's hard to talk too much about the content of the film because we don't know. We're kind of just reading tea leaves at this point. But when you step back and you say, okay, now it's a movie about disclosure, right? Literally called Disclosure Day, in the context of all of the current events, going back to Obama saying, oh, aliens are real. And then Trump saying, oh, he's violated national security. And then, oh, wait a minute, Trump has a speech written. He's going to be disclosed. Now he's asking for the files to be released. So then you start to step back and you go, wow, I guess it's just a coincidence that there's a big movie, a blockbuster film that's coming out called Disclosure Day. Well, all of this stuff is happening in the real world. And you say, oh, I wonder if that convergence of a big movie coming out and our president saying he wants to get the truth out, is all of that just a coincidence? Quite possibly. But then you add the next layer, which is, oh, by the way, Steven Spielberg made this movie. Steven Spielberg, who made what people consider to be the definitive UFO movie in Close Encounters, right? That, as we discussed in episode 2, has some kind of smoking gun evidence that he might have known something. Well, if he knew something then, why wouldn't he know something now? So
Yeah.
then you start to connect the dots and you say, look at how many different, alien or UFO related projects he's been involved in. And now he's coming out at the end of towards the end of his career. Hopefully he goes on for another 20 years. But towards the end of his career with what could be the definitive UFO. And so it's hard not to get really excited that this means more than just a movie, that it's this next chapter in the alliance between Hollywood and the government that's starting to, in its own way, make the idea of what we're talking about, there was agreement, start to bring that to the surface, right? Because what happens in the trailer? Well, they use the media, right? In terms of how they disclose it, it's being done over a news broadcast, or that's the implication anyway. It's because how else do you reach everybody in this day and age? So then it just, the whole thing starts to become, very meta in that regard. It's like we're going to be watching a movie about disclosure that's part of disclosure potentially. And that's super compelling. And I think it could all just be a publicity stunt. It could all just be that this is all opportunistic and it's going to have, set box office records because of the implications. But there also could be real, actual disclosure going on in some form or another.
And I think just if you notice in the trailer, when they're all standing looking at their phones, if you freeze frame it, you can see on their phone screens, they're all looking at the same video. And it appears to be some kind of tall creature with long arms and legs. You can just make out if you freeze it for a second on all their phones as well. So there is now the glimpse of that, the glimpse of the craft. Well, looks like a craft coming through the clouds. It could always be a flash forward, a flashback, a premonition. You never know when it comes to these trailers. But it looks interesting. And John Williams is coming out of retirement to score this movie as well. That's right, isn't it? Who's one of the most famous composers of all time. And again, is that just John Williams fancies another big payday, or is it he wants to put his name to something pretty prominent? And I had an interview this morning. If you know the gentleman, Mark Christopher Lee, who's been on social media, he's been saying he had a Washington insider tell him that President Trump had his speech written. Yeah. I've spoke to him about that this morning, and we were talking about the idea that what if Disclosure Day, only a few weeks before this alleged date of July 8th, the Roswell anniversary, and maybe Trump does do the speech, you can go back and say, look, right now in movie theaters, there's a movie called Disclosure Day. This has been made in conjunction with various government officials. We think people should see it. It's going to be on every major news network at this time this week. We're going to put on every TV station around the world for free. It's going to be on Netflix, Amazon Prime, whatever. Go watch this. And also, here's a catalogue of books, documentaries, DVDs, VHS, Betamax, whatever people want to consume or how they consume their media, we recommend catching up with. And there's a catalogue there, isn't there, of which you've both been involved in some of that. And Bryce, again, throwing that to you, do you want to expand on the idea of Hollywood leading disclosure because you're reaching hundreds of millions, if not billions of people?
Yeah, I'm going to dive in on Disclosure Day for just a minute.
Go for it.
First of all, John Williams, if he came out of retirement, it was last year when they were making it, or earlier this late in 25. And the reason he probably did is because he and Spielberg have made so many movies together, it would be incomprehensible for the two of them not to come together for this one. Here's a great example, though, of why sound, light, and frequency is so interesting. Brent and you have both referred to this sort of worldwide media presentation that is somehow part of Disclosure Day. And you're thinking about that, and if you're a sound, light, and frequency co-host, you say, when have I seen that before? And the answer is, you've seen it a lot before, but you specifically saw it in Man of Steel, the Superman movie, where the alien come to the world and take over all the screens in the world at the same time. So we've certain things, and so that's the kind of thing we would point out. We'd say, and then we would say, well, what's the chance that they would actually do that? Right? Why would they do that? Why wouldn't they do that? What can we learn from that? Is that just a guess, or is that how disclosure is going to go down? And what does it mean? You're saying people are looking at their phones and seeing spindly grays on it. what does that mean? Does that mean the aliens are going to take over the TVs of the world, or are we doing it? Is the guy who says in that trailer that they're going to do it, is he an alien? Is he a person? What is that? Couple of quick thoughts regarding Spielberg. He, as Brent pointed out, we wish him health and happiness for the rest of his life, but I think he's 82 or something close to that. And so I think the reason there's so much energy behind trying to understand what he's going to do with this movie is that people are wondering, is this a bookend to Close Encounters? Was Close Encounters what young Steven Spielberg said? This is what's going on, folks. And now you got old Steven Spielberg, and he's doing it again. And are they bookends to the same kind of story? Are they related in some way? Or are they just completely different? The other thing that it makes you think about then is, okay, he's doing this huge movie that anyone who cares about UFOs is going to be in the theaters in week one watching it, right? And so the question is this possibly Spielberg's concluding argument about what he thinks is going on? That makes it really compelling to me, because if you think about it, and believe me, Brent and I have thought about it, I'm sure you've thought about it, but Spielberg has not just done Close Encounters. He's been doing this all his career. I mean, he's done Falling Skies. He's done War of the Worlds. He's done E.T. He's been involved with Transformers. He's done Men in Black. I mean, this guy has been doing UFO movies and TV series forever. Brent and I have worked with him before. We both had our own Close Encounters with Steven Spielberg. We've talked UFOs with the guy, which is a fascinating thing to be able to say. I mean, it gives me goosebumps just saying, wow, I talked to Spielberg about UFOs. So I guess the question I would have, and that I'm so compelled by, is if you were to look at his body of work over his entire career and say, what are we to glean from this? Well, it's not like there's one message embedded in everything he's ever done. There are many messages of different kinds. I mean, E.T. couldn't be a nicer alien to drop by, but the dudes from War of the Worlds, not so much. The guys in Falling Skies, not really our best friends. Okay. So that's why I'm particularly and profoundly interested to see the whole thing laid out, because whether he wants it to be his concluding argument or not, that's how I'm going to see it.
And I think whenever he's had a movie or TV show, correct me if I'm wrong, it's always been one type of alien in the film. And this might be the opportunity where he drops in a second NHI at the same time. How do they interact? Because he's never really approached that before. It's always been a phenomenon, an entity.
But again, you're talking to a sound, light, and frequency guy. If you go to Falling Skies, yes, there are the badass aliens that are killing everybody. But in the series, some good aliens show up. They look like 12-foot tall grays or something, but they're on our side. So he's open to other. Look, I think anyone who studies it would, and he certainly has, would have to have their mind open to the idea that there isn't just one. You know, if we're going to say the universe is teeming with life and it's in abundance and there's intelligent life and they'd be interested in us, then it doesn't stand up as a very strong argument to say there's only one of them that's ever been here. You know, if we have company, if that's the reality we face, then we probably have a lot of company.
Well, and here's another way to look at it, which is, you know, people can say, oh, well, Spielberg keeps changing his point of view, right? He goes from E.T. to War of the Worlds. Like, you know, it's like, what is it? Are they good aliens or are they bad aliens? And as Bryce said, you know, why does it have to be one? To which I would say, well, if you look at everything Spielberg has laid out for us, what if it's all true, right? What if the bigger picture that we're looking at, you can't see in one movie or even two or three? You have to look back and say, there's a representation here of all aspects of what's going on. And I feel like certainly within ufology, there is this conversation that it's much more complex than anyone can really grasp. And that may be, in fact, part of why disclosure has not been forthcoming, because it isn't as simple as saying there's a race on Alpha Centauri and they've been coming here for 100 years. And, it's potentially many races. It's potentially extraterrestrial, interdimensional, time travel. Like that is something that Steven Spielberg personally believes. He's gone on record about. So then you say, but what if it's all of that, right? And then you start to look at everything that's ever been told in Hollywood, and you say, well, okay, every one of those stories has some truth to it. Then the big picture starts to feel really kind of both exciting and overwhelming.
Absolutely. Even the idea it could be an intergalactic take a number line where each race gets 5 years to visit, do what they want, and then leave, and then it's someone else's turn. And it's like you might get some good ones, you might get some bad ones, and yeah, who knows? It's a very strange. What I'd love to do is finish off with some listener questions, gents, because I had so many people get in touch with me to ask. So thank you to everyone who got in touch, and apologies if I don't get to your question, but I'm going to pick through some here. So Short Stuff says, obviously, Bryce, you co-authored AD After Disclosure. You wrote that society was not ready for official confirmation of ET contact because of the profound global, religious, economic and social upheaval it would cause. With everything that's happened in the UAP world since 2017, has your view on that changed?
Sure. You have to sort of, if you're going to try to address this vast mystery, this vast unknown, you have to keep your mind open as new facts emerge. So in 2010 or so, when Rich Dolan and I were writing it, remember, Lou Elizondo and the gang and the New York Times didn't get involved till 2017. So we were writing this 7 years earlier. And we were trying to ask ourselves, well, what is something that would force disclosure? Well, a giant public event like the Phoenix situation from 97, if it were to happen today, would force disclosure. So we thought that might be top down, that might be a president or somebody confirming it. But obviously, to use a film metaphor, it is true that at the beginning, when I was writing with Rich, I wouldn't bet my house on it. I might bet your house on it, Andy, but I wouldn't bet my house on it that it was going to, just sort of emerge. I would have said it's probably going to take an event that makes it happen. And so in Hollywood, the way we would call that is we say, is it a dissolve or a hard cut? Is it a slow dissolve or a hard cut? Right. Mm-hmm. So I think Dolan and I were saying, well, the secrecy is so entrenched, it sure looks like it's going to take a hard cut. But if to answer your listener's question, I think my mind is pretty much changed by what the reality on the ground here. It seems like we are in the middle of a slow dissolve from BC before confirmation to AD after disclosure, and to me, that is what makes where we are kind of interesting and exciting, and what it makes the movie thing even more interesting. Because in reality, the guy that came to Brent and myself, JC, was talking about slow drip disclosure. So basically, the dissolve rather than the hard cut. And given that was decades ago, that's probably where we are. We're in the middle of that.
One from Neil, and I'll come to Brent with this, but obviously both of you can answer. If Dark Skies hadn't been cancelled, what did you envisage for its future in terms of storyline?
Mm-hmm. A lot is the answer. We as we talked about a little bit in episode 1, we wrote a Bible like that was that contemplated 5 seasons of storytelling. And I think, we talked about going from 65 million BC
that's it. 65 million BC
up to the year 2000. I think that was our that was kind of our canvas. And so
actually, Brent, I looked at that timeline that we wrote to sell this thing the other day. It goes up to 2050.
Oh, okay.
65 million BC to 2050. We we were full of hubris back then. We were younger men. We thought we could handle that.
Yeah.
But and continue. But yeah.
So if that's our canvas, our entry point into the storytelling was, the the Kennedy administration, and ultimately leading to the Kennedy's assassination, and so that was kind of the flashpoint that we jumped in and said, okay, now let's both move forward in time. So each season we were going to move forward approximately another decade, right? That was the initial plan. But at the same time, we were going to go and backfill and look back at Roswell and other events that had happened, and even go back further in time, all the way to 65 million BC, to look at the larger story of alien intervention, in with humanity. And so we were very excited about the idea that with each decade, you could go in and, the 60s was one story. When we were getting into the 70s, you just think about all of the stuff that happened in the 70s, right?
Yeah.
From the missing gap on the Watergate tape, right? Well, what if they were talking about aliens? Like, you start to, all these little kind of creases in history allows us to come in and kind of find the alternative history seen through the lens of Dark Skies. So because there was so many crazy things that happened in the second half of the 20th century, we had probably more episode ideas than we could have fit into 5 seasons, all right. Not laid out in specific detail. But if you think about each one of those type of events, like the Watergate tapes, that's an episode right there. That's one little historical footnote. And we had the whole space program. Like, there's many episodes there. So you start to look at history through that lens, and you realize this show could have gone on in infinitely, really, in some ways.
The only thing I would add to that would be, it is hard for people that hear us talk about it and go, I'd like to see that. It is hard to see it because it's not streaming right now.
Yeah.
And the DVD set, which is phenomenally good, has stopped production. So you can still get it, but harder. So what we've tried to do, Andy, is just make it easier for people that want to just figure out what it looked and sounded like, is we've used our soundlightfrequency.com site to put up some Dark Skies videos, photos, promos, so that you can get a taste of the thing and see what we were going through. Because, by the way, I just put this out there. In addition to the fact somebody came and tried to recruit us in my backyard, those decades ago, we also lived through something. I've launched numerous shows. I've been on shows, a dozen shows. I had a creative buy on 5 series. I never had anything like Dark Skies. When Brent and I were doing Dark Skies, there were hundreds of buses in Los Angeles that had the Dark Skies American flag with the alien eyes peering through it on these shrink wrap buses. And, and people, there were airplanes up there doing skywriting about it. So yeah, we lived through a very special time just as a television series. And the fact that it was about UFOs and somebody else seemed to be watching it, that was the bonus.
And with Disclosure Day on the horizon and the X-Files reboot due out in the next kind of 12 to 18 months, is there no wiggle room in there for a Dark Skies reimagining second season reboot?
Dear God, please.
I mean, it's, as Bryce mentioned, we've put up some clips and stuff on our website. We also have a petition.
I have signed that already. Yep.
Yeah. So
Good
thank
man.
you to get it re-released. But I think that, to your point, people are going to be just rediscovering or discovering the show in the course of our podcast. And we have always contemplated over the years, well, what would we do if we could go back, and if someone said, hey, let's reboot Dark Skies, would we go back and just redo it now with better film technology? Or would we pick up where we left off? Or would we find a whole other entry point into the timeline that we created? I don't have the answer for you, because we've had good ideas around all of those approaches. But I think that would be an absolutely very, compelling outcome of the podcast, that, we tell our story and it actually leads to kind of the reimagining, if you will, of Dark Skies in the present day.
Yeah, I'd love to see that. Even a bit of a Quantum Leap was one of my favorite shows growing up, and maybe a Quantum Leap Dark Skies mashup where someone's leaking into different incidents in UFO history around there. Lots of room to wiggle with there as well. But yeah, I could do that all day. Emo Gooden said, what do Bryce and Brent think about the idea our collective beliefs regarding the phenomenon shape our perceptions of encounters? I'm thinking the evolution of UFOs beginning with airships in the 1800s, then evolving into saucers, triangles, orbs, and now drones. It's almost as though the phenomenon evolves as we do.
I don't think it's almost as if. I mean, the thing that vexed me and Brent, because what we tried to do with Dark Skies is we wanted to take everything that was out there and pull it in and find a way to make it part of a shared universe. And the thing that we had to struggle with is if you look at the flying saucers of the 1950s, they're pretty much flying saucers, and they're not complex. Then then they've evolved. And at the same time they have evolved on camera in movies. I mean, the UFOs of Spielberg's Close Encounters are very different from the Day the Earth Stood Still flying saucer, right? So yeah, it's I even forgot the question right now, but I'll let Brent save me as he does in our podcast.
Well, this is my favorite question so far because it touches on stuff that I happen to believe, which is admittedly somewhat out there, but being an experiencer myself, I have come to realize that, as I mentioned earlier, a lot of what's going on is personal and subjective in terms of when people talk about their experiences. They're very unique, and there's been cases where there's the Rashomon effect where several people see and experience the same thing, but they remember different details, right? Even just us with JC again. So to me, the role of consciousness in all of this is super important, and we don't really understand consciousness. It's something that right now is being approached, and science seems to have a strong interest in it. But I think it's up there with space and the deep sea, which is the undiscovered territory, right? But it also happens to be what informs our lives, our reality. And so trying to understand when we look at like the evolution of let's say UFOs, I think that there's two things going on. One is it's impossible not to see that there's a correlation between what did people believe was possible at the time, going back to the early 1900s or even the turn of the 20th century. That evolution, you asked the question, could it have been a coincidence? It doesn't make any sense that an advanced race would be evolving in the same time frame that we're evolving.
Right.
They're more advanced than us, right? They should never have airships. That doesn't make any sense.
Yeah.
So, but here's where I would say my theory is out there. I think that we bring, as a collective consciousness, we are co-creating in some way how we perceive a non-human intelligence, right? It's presenting itself to us in a certain fashion that makes sense for the time period that we live in. And I think that the way that I would connect this is move into a different topic of the afterlife, right? There's a lot of commonalities when people have near-death experiences. And yet, what you find is that their frame of reference about what they see and what happens in that thing is often based on their belief systems. So they're having a very common universal experience, right, that crosses all kind of cultures and religions and everything. But what they personally bring to that experience colors it in a very unique way. And I believe there's a version of that's what's going on with ufology writ large, meaning that's the individual's consciousness. But I think our collective consciousness as a civilization is helping shape and shift what we're seeing, right? Which raises the real question is, are we creating our own disclosure, right? I don't know, but it's something that tickles me because that's the type of thinking that I like to do. outside of sound, light, and frequency to some degree, because I know we're going off in weird esoteric areas.
No,
not really. Fair. That's the essence of the show sometimes. And I love what Brent just said, but a concrete example from our show would be our pilot was taking the Kennedy assassination and UFOs, the two greatest conspiracies, putting them in an atom collider. And that's what the pilot's about. Kennedy gets killed because he's going to tell the truth about UFOs in his second term. Okay. When we put that into Dark Skies, we couldn't find much about that anywhere. I mean, there's no internet when we were doing it, so there's no way to research that. But we just put it out there. And now, if you go on the internet, you'll read a lot about JFK and UFOs. And we certainly didn't have access to any of that, right? It was just like, okay, let's tell a great story. We'll use basically JFK's murder as a story prop, as a story point. And now it seems to be accepted by a lot of people in ufology that there's a connection.
Right. So, and that goes back to the chicken and the egg thing, right?
Yeah. Totally.
Was that the truth? Was he always involved? And then it kind of came to us through the collective consciousness, which when you're writing, sometimes things just come to you. And we put it out there, which then led to people investigating it, which then surfaced that truth. Or did we get an idea that we put out there that then reality starts conforming to that idea as people start to believe it? And now there's evidence in the past that it might have been true. I don't know, because what we're talking about again is consciousness. How does consciousness work? We don't know what the limits of it are.
Well, I know,
Brent, we're going to have to come up with something besides chicken and egg. Sounds kind of old farmer kind of thing. Maybe is it the orb or the saucer or something like that?
Yeah. What came first, the orb or the saucer? I think most folk would say the saucer, but yeah. I want to ask you one more question, one more listener question here before we wrap up. You've been really good with your time. Dave asked a few things, but Bryce and Brent have mentioned the member of the Reagan cabinet who said that when he was told the truth of the NHI reality, he cried himself to sleep for weeks after. What do they both think he was told, or what are the possible options?
When I think about that conversation I had, that is the one statement that has haunted me over the years. And a lot of it is contextual, meaning I grew up with this person. I knew how strong and tough and, mentally tough he was. So to be told that he cried himself to sleep every night when he was being disclosed to himself, when he was being briefed, I couldn't fathom it. I couldn't imagine this man ever crying once, but let alone every night. And, I think his statement essentially was some version of, this isn't the world that he thought he was bringing his kids into. So you're seeing it through the lens of a parent. I don't know if you have kids. I have kids.
Yeah.
Kids. And when you start to think about what it's like, okay, I'm an adult. I can probably handle some version of the truth, but that's not my kids. That's not the world I wanted my kids to inherit. And so I think, to answer your question specifically, for him to respond in that way in 1981 to whatever they thought they knew at that time, it must have been shattering. It must have been, to me, it wasn't, that statement I didn't interpret as, oh, here's what's going on with UFOs and aliens. To me, it was about, this is what is going on with reality, right?
Yeah.
Because that's a bigger, more shattering statement in my mind. And so I kind of, I have wondered over the years, how dark is it that it would cause him to have that reaction? And yet he didn't go into a shell. He went and worked every day and went on to become the Secretary of Energy in Reagan's second term. He went on, he still, so is it just a matter of being able to compartmentalize this like shattering truth? Or was it something that when I talked to him, only knew kind of the tip of the iceberg, and he's since learned a much bigger, part of the story that is not as harrowing? I don't know. But in that moment, when he told me, it was like having a bomb dropped on me. And I still, to this day, wonder, how bad could it be?
Well, we've got Lou Elizondo who keeps talking about, or not, he did talk about how people would be somber if they knew what he knew. So, and then there's also that story, famous, don't know if it's true or not, about Jimmy Carter getting some form of limited disclosure and being seen at his desk in the Oval Office in tears. So who knows? I mean, maybe it's not. But listen, most of us believe, bad or good, it's pretty well time to fess up. Whatever we know, the people who know more than the three of us need to show their work and tell us what's going on. And like you guys, by the way, we're talking about kids. I have kids, but I have grandkids now, and I look at my grandkids and I go, they possibly, and not possibly, are likely going to live into the next century. Okay, so that's my expectation. Is there anything about what John Harrington heard that caused him to believe that wouldn't be the reality going forward? And if that was the case, I would cry. In fact, if I knew that right now, I wouldn't be on this show. I'd just be, spending time with my grandkids while I could. You know what I'm saying? So we don't know yet. And I doubt that Sound, Light, and Frequencies, investigation is going to turn up that ultimate truth. It may turn up while we're still podcasting, I suppose. But what we may turn up, though, through our looking into this, is a closer relationship between people who have authority and knowledge in this area and how they've wanted to use Hollywood to try to tell their story more effectively.
And I think for me, what podcasts like Sound, Light, and Frequency will do, and people listening to this and watching this in the future, and other shows and podcasts, is people who may be able to solve these problems down the line, 5, 10, 15, 20, 50 years in the future, might not be interested now in the topic, but they hear an episode, they go and watch a movie, they pick up a book, and before you know it, they're involved and their expertise lead to something else. So listen, you've both been wonderful with your time. Do you want to give Sound, Light, and Frequency one more plug? How can people watch it and find it?
Well, I want to plug something else because we read a lot of books here, and I've been reading this one, and it's by some obscure author. Let me see.
Yeah.
Oh, it's you, Andy. Yeah. The Atlas of Unidentified Flying Objects and Unidentified Anomalous Phenomena. Listen, I will do a little Sound, Light, and Frequency, but this is a good book, and it's a good book because you've taken all the things that we all sort of are aware of, but where do you get all the details? You've managed to put it into your atlas. So I really enjoyed it. And so I do recommend it.
Cheers, Bryce.
As for Sound, Light, and Frequency, again, all you have to remember are those three words, and you have to figure out how to spell them properly. But if you can do that, you can go to soundlightfrequency.com, and that's sort of the one all. Or, as we like to say, wherever you get your podcasts, could be Spotify, could be Apple, could be Pandora, could be iHeart, or anywhere else. All you have to do is go there, because we're everywhere, just like your podcast is, Andy. It's everywhere. You just have to search for it. So we encourage people to search for it because, for example, we have talked about this story a couple of times in this episode, Andy, about the briefing Brent got. But we haven't, we've scratched the surface. And in this next episode, The Man Who Cried Himself to Sleep, we're going deeper. So, I encourage people to look into it. And I thank you for giving us the forum to talk about it. Deeply appreciated.
Yeah, absolutely. And the last thing I will add is that for anyone that is interested in the series, understand that we have 36 episodes to tell several decades worth of personal stories. But we're using each episode we're taking a movie or a TV show, or sometimes in certain episodes, multiple ones, as portals into a certain aspect of ufology, right? And then using that as a springboard to tell some of our personal stories. And so I think the expectation is, we set certain things in motion in the pilot, in the first episode, bringing JC up, introducing this idea of the formula that he gave us. And did we take the deal? What is the formula? All of those things will be answered over the course of 36 episodes. We are trying to tell the story in the same way, to a certain effect, the way we experienced it, right? We didn't have all the answers up front, right? And so we want to take people on the same kind of ride that we did, where it's like we had to struggle and fight and make sense of different things. And we're going to try and replicate that experience to some degree in the course of our storytelling. But rest assured, everything that we know by the end of 36 episodes will be out on the table, and it'll be open to interpretation, and we will have our own theories, but we can't wait to hear everyone's theories as well.
We're going to dump so much on the table, Andy, that we live in fear that at the end of it, iHeart will go, why don't you do another season? Because we'll have put all our great ideas out there already. So, but it's certainly fun. And we thank you for, calling attention to it. Well done.
You're more than welcome. And there'll be chicken and eggs everywhere, I'm sure, when that time comes.
That'll be at the next party. All right. Thank you.
Great. Thank you so much.